Well, Dr. Mariza, like Teresa, she corrected me on her name. So Mariza Snyder is here with us, and I'm really excited to dive into this topic. You're obviously a perimenopause, menopause expert. So many women are struggling with different issues when it comes to going through this, this part of midlife where their hormones start to change.
Yeah.
And there's so many women out there that are struggling with issues and they're looking for solutions. So let's start with, your perimenopause journey and how that's inspired you to support women as they go through this.
Yes, I am fully in perimenopause as we speak at the age of 45. I would say I'm kind of in between early and late. I'm in the middle. And it has been a profound journey. I remember the first time I really kind of knew what perimenopause was is when I watched my mom go through it. And I was old enough at that time that I could actually help guide her. But I felt like I didn't have a lot of tools in my toolbox. Like no one had really prepared me. I didn't learn a lot about it in school, let alone menopause, but at least I knew a little bit about menopause. I had no idea that it was such a profound, what I call neuroendocrine transition,
Mm.
where everything is kind of on the decline. In a lot of ways, it happens without our permission. And I remember my mom's journey looking like a nightmare unfolding to me. And I thought, oh my God, is this coming for me? And luckily I knew a lot about what to expect, but it has been pretty profound for me as well, and especially all the brain related symptoms. But a lot of what women come to me for, not just the brain related, the mood swings, the brain fog, the lack of word recall, or even the lack of stress tolerance, it's more the metabolic changes. Like all of a sudden, biomarkers, lipids, fasting blood glucose, all of those look great. And then all of a sudden, a year later, they start to move in an unfavorable direction. And that has a lot to do with the fact that as these hormones decline, because that's ultimately what's going on, our protection, our insulin sensitivity begins to kind of get disrupted. And we start to see fat distribution shifting and changing. We begin to see lipid markers and I guess the blood sugar start to shift. We start to see more inching towards prediabetes. But women, what they describe and what I've seen in my own practice is that they, everything that they're doing isn't working anymore, and they want to know, how can I actually pivot, or is this just how it's going to be? And I hope that's what we get into today.
Well, absolutely. Let's talk about some of the most common symptoms that women are experiencing as they get into this transition. And also you touched on this topic of neuroendocrine transition. And so
Mm-hmm.
that means brain
Yeah.
hormone. And so
Yes,
let's
it
talk
does.
about how the brain communicates with the brain is obviously communicating with everything in the body and the hormones are communicating messengers. And so let's dive into that topic as well.
Yeah, let's talk about those feedback loops. And we talk about one of the most profound feedback loops, which is the HPO axis, the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis or the gonadal axis. And there is a connection. I mean, think about women, once we come online, that's puberty, right? And perimenopause is very much a second puberty. So I always call puberty the ascension, where girls are coming online and their cycles are beginning to run. And we have, follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. These are actually hypothalamic hormones that are in the pituitary gland, and they are relaying information to run our cycle, and they're really controlling our menstrual cycle, our ovarian cycle, and as a result, they're controlling estradiol and progesterone. And there's this beautiful dance that happens, let's say every 28 days for about 30 plus years, until we start to wind things down. And what a lot of people don't realize is that it's all based on our egg supply. And that egg supply was already predetermined before you were born, before any woman
Mm.
was born. And as those eggs start to wind down, usually after the age of, let's say, 35, 37, 38, we start to experience this disconnection, this disruption in that feedback loop between the brain and the endocrine glands, that the ovaries. And as that begins to decline, we know that those life-giving hormones, estradiol and progesterone, are beginning to decline as well. And that's really what perimenopause is. It is the erratic decline of these really profound life-giving hormones. Now, the one that I want to focus on really quickly, probably is really running the show, is going to be estradiol. And she is a growth hormone. She really is the queen bee. But what a lot of people don't know is that estradiol is the master regulator for the female brain. that she is basically the fuel that the brain runs on. And as your brain is shifting away from estradiol being that massive fuel source, we begin to see major changes happen. We see an uptick in inflammation in the brain. We see a change in glucose metabolism. We always think about prediabetes being, type 3 diabetes is Alzheimer's. And so we see that shift in glucose metabolism. We also see a shift in neurotransmitters because they're not being bound to the way that they were when we had, an abundance of estrogen and progesterone in the brain. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about that neuroendocrine transition is not only are we seeing major changes throughout the body on a metabolic scale, whether it's blood sugar, it's bone remodeling, it is, the way that our muscles are, stimulated, but also on a neurological level where women notice the hot flashes, night sweats. These are neurologically driven or brain derived symptoms. Low libido, low stress tolerance, brain fog, lack of word recall, inflammation, sleep issues. All of this is brain related symptoms due to the decline of these hormones and the decline of our ovarian function.
Yeah, absolutely. And so during this transition, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone all drop.
Yes.
I've
And
heard from
melatonin.
many, right, and melatonin as well. And so I've heard from many that oftentimes for a lot of people, the estrogen to progesterone ratio that, there's always more estrogen in a sense than progesterone, but then they both drop during perimenopause, but the drop in progesterone for many females is more significant than the drop in estrogen. Have you found that to be the case?
I have found that to be the case in the beginning. So
Yeah.
in the beginning, let's talk a little bit about the phases of perimenopause. So the first phase, I call it early
Mm.
perimenopause, and I would say that is anywhere between our mid to late 30s into our really early 40s. And a lot of it's brushed off as the normalization of the daily pain points of modern day life for women. I'm a mom to a 4-year-old who's actually sick right now. So let me
Mm.
tell you, my sleep the last couple of nights, not
Mm.
so great with a little fevering 4-year-old. There's nothing more uncomfortable than a little 4-year-old or a 3-year-old who doesn't even know why they're
Mm.
uncomfortable. At least when you're an adult, you understand what's going on. You're like, okay, there's a virus. There's something I'm fighting a virus.
Get
You
it. Yep.
understand why your nose is running and why you're yucky. Whereas little ones, there is just everything's miserable. So we've been in that camp right now. And I could easily, in the beginning, let's say late 30s, early 40s, I could say, oh man, I'm just not getting enough sleep. I'm prioritizing obligations, or, ooh, I'm getting a little bit edgier, a little bit more irritated. Like the most common symptom, the hands down, I think people think it's mostly weight resistance or weight gain, but the most common symptom of perimenopause is irritability.
Mm.
You're just, things are shifting, and that's that low progesterone that you're talking about. But initially it just kind of feels like
Yeah.
things are just a
And that's
little
because
bit more.
progesterone is a GABA agonist, right? It
Yes,
helps
it
with the
is. Yeah.
inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain.
And
Yeah.
it's a sedative too. It's a beautiful
Right.
sedative, and it works really beautifully with melatonin. So it's no
Mm.
surprise that melatonin is declining as progesterone is declining. But then around like our early 40s, for most women in perimenopause, they really start to notice, and that's when progesterone is not just subtly shifting; that hormone significantly shifting and declining. And so all of a sudden now it's mostly again these brain related symptoms where women are like, man, I just don't feel like myself anymore, especially that second half of our cycle when we're supposed to have actually it's actually more progesterone than estrogen on,
Mm. Yeah.
day 21, day 20 of that
Hmm.
luteal phase of your cycle. And yes, some women may notice in relation to lower levels of progesterone, some unopposed estrogen. So we would call that, estrogen dominance. But
Hmm.
often I see that really only in early
Mm.
perimenopause, where women will notice it's basically more severe PMS. More
Mm.
bloating, heavier
Yeah.
periods, more irritation, more mood-like symptoms, where there's kind of like this disconnect where we just don't have enough progesterone to kind of carry us through that second half of our cycle. And it just feels
Yeah.
like someone just took it up a notch, a big notch. But then as we had, again, perimenopause being, on average an 8-year transition, very similar to puberty. It takes about 8 years to really get into full reproductive years, like late teens, early 20s. It's going to take us just as long, except that we're not worried about high school friends and tests in school. Now we have families and jobs and a
Mhm.
lot of bigger responsibilities that we're dealing with. So it all just feels like a lot more is going on during this transition. But around our mid 40s, I would say that's when we start to notice slight estrogen withdrawals as well. And that's when we'll notice, maybe again, it's harder to put on muscle. We're noticing metabolic changes. We're seeing shifts in our labs. We're feeling more inflamed. Maybe our thyroid function starts to shift as well. And so we'll start to notice some even bigger changes and more symptoms as we move into late perimenopause. And late perimenopause, the way that we kind of define it is that this is when you're missing a period for more than 60 days. And you're about 4 years out from menopause. So a lot of women around 46, 47 is when they really are in late perimenopause. But in those early perimenopausal years where you still are regularly cycling, you may not be ovulating every single cycle and things are rough, yet again, we often are normalizing those as just things getting a little bit harder, or maybe we're pushing ourselves too hard when it really is a drop in progesterone levels, along with
Mm.
life happening at the same time.
Yeah, that's a really great breakdown. And, I'm sorry to hear about your daughter there being sick. I've got four young kids as well, four young kids under 9 years old. So I know what that's like. And,
Yeah, I'm
my
sure when
wife,
your household gets sick, it's a lot of family.
absolutely, absolutely. And my wife's in perimenopause as well. I would say the biggest symptom she notices is that her menstrual cycle is unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
So rather than following a 28-day cycle, some months it's 20 days, other months it's 25 days, right? But it's not as predictable as it used to be for her. And I think that's a common thing as well that happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, initially you'll notice it'll shorten. So, full
Hmm.
disclaimer, mine used to be 28, 29. Now it's 26.
Yeah.
I'm not to the point where it's that erratic where it's really shifting
Hmm.
days. But I noticed the symptoms in that luteal phase where the progesterone just isn't, she's not showing up the way that she used to.
Hmm.
And I don't ovulate every single month. That's just not happening anymore at
Mm.
45 years old. And then, I know that in the next several years, I always tell women like how you'll know kind of your timeline in perimenopause is to ask your mom. Hopefully she didn't have a hysterectomy that put her into earlier menopause. But that is the case for a lot of the women I talk to. But ask your mom when she went into menopause. So my mom was like 53, 54.
Hmm.
And so, I'm reverse engineering my numbers. And so, yeah, that puts me kind of in the middle of perimenopause right now. I'll probably go into late perimenopause in the next 2 years.
For sure. Now let's talk about blood glucose and
Yeah.
managing our blood sugar, our insulin levels. Why is that so impactful when it comes to perimenopause and menopause?
Absolutely. I would say that is the probably one of the biggest levers that we can pull when it comes to not only our cellular energy, but ultimately our overall energy and function. And ultimately, if we're looking to maintain a healthy weight, blood glucose is going to play a big role here as well. And as I mentioned earlier, estradiol is one of those great protectors of insulin and blood glucose levels in the body. And as we start to see that estrogen drop again, mid 40s, give or take, that's when we'll start to notice that maybe we're creeping towards, a fasting blood glucose of 90 or even 100 milligrams per deciliter, that being an indicator of prediabetes. But also it's an indicator of weight gain and fat gain as well. I always say
Yeah.
insulin is a fat storage hormone and not just a
Yeah.
regulator of our metabolism. And for many of us, due to lifestyle changes and habits, we're probably heading into perimenopause a bit insulin resistant out the gate, and losing those hormones doesn't do us any favors. And so as we start to see that last bit of protection that we had, that estradiol protection, as we begin to lose that, all of a sudden our weight begins to climb. And I believe the 90% of us will gain 5 pounds of fat
Mm.
in perimenopause. 10% of us will gain at least 10 pounds of fat. And so if we just go through it in a default kind of way, we don't make those pivots to help to shore up our blood glucose levels and help to ensure that we stay insulin sensitive.
Yeah, for sure. And so you'd say that this weight gain, the main factor there is going to be insulin resistance. And so what can women do to help
Yeah.
support blood sugar management and insulin sensitivity?
I think the first thing, test, don't guess, see where you're at. I think
Mm.
it's always good to know. Um, you know, ask, beg, go out of your network to get that fasting insulin
Mm.
test. A lot of our insurances aren't covering it or doctors aren't giving it to us. But I would say annually, if you can get that
Pretty
fasting insulin
inexpensive
test,
test if
it's
you just do an
extremely
add-on too.
inexpensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You can absolutely do it on out of pocket. There's a lot of
Yep.
different companies that will do it with you for you. But that would be one of the first things I would do is just kind of see the level I want you at is 5 or under.
Hmm.
Although, on the range for your test, it'll say something between 1 and 25,
Mm.
international units. And so I just want to make it clear that you want to be under 5 and then be looking at your fasting blood glucose and your hemoglobin A1C as well. And so I'm always looking for a hemoglobin A1C, 5.5 or under. I'm
Hmm.
looking for a fasting glucose under 85 milligrams per deciliter. And then the other thing I always tell women, especially if you feel like something isn't right, you're putting on that weight, is to invest in a continuous glucose monitor. It's
Yeah.
probably one of the most game changing, um, devices that we can put on our bodies to really understand what's going on in real time, what we're eating, how that's influencing our metabolism. I always say that insulin and blood glucose are the ultimate biomarkers of longevity because they really are helping to, it's giving you a picture of what your mitochondrial health is looking like. If your mitochondria having to constantly take on more and more substrate, it just ends up gunking the system and causing more mitochondrial damage and degradation. And so putting on a continuous glucose monitor allows you to look at real time, how your sleep is affecting your metabolism and your blood glucose, how what you're eating is affecting your blood glucose, your movement, your stress levels. I mean, all of those things can be really interpreted through wearing a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. It gives you that dynamic feedback as far as how your body's responding to things. Now, what I found is that I think fasting insulin's a lot more important than the fasting glucose. Of course,
Absolutely.
you and I both know fasting glucose could be like out of control, right? Somebody that has uncontrolled diabetes, insulin resistance. The issue is particularly when somebody has very high fasting glucose and high fasting insulin, right? But, if the fasting glucose is like 100, 105, but the insulin is 3 in the morning, that person might just have like a dawn phenomenon or maybe a little bit stressed, as they're getting their blood drawn. So I don't put
Or
as
or
much
their or
into,
poor sleep, that night
yeah, poor
before.
sleep for sure, for sure.
Any
Yep.
of those factors. And I think
Yeah.
that's why I like, I mean, we do not have technology yet that allows us to look at real time fasting
Mm,
insulin, which would
yeah.
be so amazing.
Great.
And I believe that that's coming very soon.
Hmm.
But what we can extrapolate from with the fasting glucose is trends. Like we can
Mm,
look every single day. So the first number I always tell people when they wear a continuous glucose monitor is your fasting glucose,
mm,
and really reverse engineering those variables, asking yourself if today it's higher, like let's say yesterday it was 77 milligrams per deciliter, now it's 86
hmm.
milligrams per deciliter, can we deduce, did you have a late night snack last night? But did you only get 5 hours of sleep last night? So be like, looking at those types of things. Is it the dawn phenomenon? So it's kind of figuring that out. But then throughout the day, looking, okay, after is it when I drink my espresso before breakfast? Is that impacting my blood sugar? Is that having an impact on my cortisol levels? We can extrapolate from there. What
Yeah.
kind of breakfast is the type of breakfast that is going to set the tone for the day? I always tell
Mm,
people, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself, but depending
hmm.
on the kind of breakfast you eat in the morning, what it's like, maybe it's a bagel and cream cheese and some
Mm,
orange juice, or maybe it's a veggie omelet with black coffee. If we see a blood sugar spike, out of, let's say, beyond 140 milligrams per deciliter, I find that even if you eat metabolically healthy for the rest of the day, it's going to take, give or take, 36 hours to restore that fasting blood glucose. So
mm.
if every day you're kicking off breakfast with a vanilla latte and a muffin or toast and
Yeah.
jam, every morning you are setting the tone for what I call a blood sugar roller coaster, reactive hypoglycemia. Like it's just a
Mm,
constant, and there's no way to get off that roller coaster. And so that first meal of the day to me really sets the tone for the rest of the day, especially for women where we're losing muscle mass and lean mass. I hope it's a very protein focused breakfast. One of the things I speak a lot into, and this has been the case for me, and I have a family full of prediabetes and full of
Hmm.
diabetes. And when I even run my
Yeah.
own genetics, that's like the one risk factor. Like, watch your blood sugar is the big thing. And so I've worn a CGM and on and off for about 3 years. And I usually wear it quarterly, to keep me honest, to keep me accountable,
Hmm.
make sure everything's where it needs to be. And what I have noticed is if I eat past the hour of 6:30, let's say I have dinner at 8 o'clock,
Hmm.
it's the same meal is going to have a much bigger
Mm.
glucose spike for me. And so, one of the things I've learned, particularly working with women in midlife, is if we can eat an earlier dinner when we are relatively more insulin resistant at night, and and shut it off. So I eat dinner and then I don't eat again until breakfast the next day. So I'm a big proponent of circadian fasting, where I like the
Mm.
12 to 14-hour fast earlier in the evening and then hit it in the next morning. And as I've looked at my own N of one CGM data, my optimal range is anywhere between 70 and 105
Mm.
milligrams per deciliter. That's a tight range.
Yeah.
And when I follow that, one, I'm mindful about what I eat during the day, but ultimately I don't eat after 6:30 at night. And I'm moving throughout the day, I'm moving after meals. I can keep my blood glucose in that tight range.
Hmm.
Um, and so those are the recommendations I'll make. And probably my favorite longevity hack that I've been following for the past several years is to move as much as possible whenever possible, but most importantly, after meals. And if there was one meal I could choose, it was always going to be dinner.
Yeah, for sure. So circadian fasting, you're eating your foods during the daylight hours. And we know
Yes.
that during the daylight hours, you're more insulin sensitive. And
Yes.
as the sun sets, you become more insulin resistant. So your body has to produce more insulin in order to get the sugar into the cells. And as you're producing more insulin, you're also blocking fat burning. That insulin is going to stay elevated in your bloodstream for a longer period of time, and it's going to block your ability to burn fat. And it's also going to promote more inflammation in your system. And so it sounds like a great idea. And then, of course, the movement is such a key factor for getting that glucose into the cells, right? As you move, your muscle tissue actually produces this GLUT4 protein receptor that or protein compound that helps come out. It's a transporter and helps pull glucose into the cell like a almost like a sponge, kind of attract or
Yeah,
like a
it's
magnet,
amazing.
attracting it and
Without
pulling it out of the
insulin.
bloodstream without insulin. So you need to produce less insulin.
Yeah.
So yeah, some great strategies right there. What are some other good strategies? You mentioned obviously the circadian fasting. So
Yeah.
let's say eating from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Yeah.
As an example, kind of like what you're doing here. And then what are some other good, you mentioned a protein centric breakfast. Can you talk
Yeah.
about like how you set up your meals?
Absolutely. So I'm a big, so the way that I talk about meals is really metabolically healthy meals. That's always what I'm thinking about. But particularly with women
Mhm.
in midlife, which is a lot of us out there, I'm also mindful about, again, maintaining that lean mass and helping to build lean muscle. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of a minimum of 30 milligrams per, sorry, 30 grams of protein at breakfast,
Mhm.
closer to 40 if you can, because I'd love for women to hit that leucine threshold out the
Mhm.
gate. And I thought, if there was I'm thinking about my own personal motivation, and if I'm trying to hit protein numbers, let's say it's one
Mhm.
gram of protein per pound of lean body mass, I'm probably going to have a better chance of hitting that if I really start my breakfast or my morning routine strong. So my goal is always 40 grams of protein out the gate, and then supplement the rest of the 110 throughout
Yeah.
the day.
And you mentioned leucine threshold. Leucine is a branched chain amino acid. It's a primary stimulator of muscle protein synthesis. And so that means muscle growth, right? And that's so key in muscle rebuilding in our system. It's roughly, I think it's going to depend on the person's
Yes,
body
it depends on the body.
size,
Yeah.
right? Slimmer, leaner women, like under 125 pounds, probably about 2.5 grams or
Yeah.
so. And then, around 150 pounds, around 3 grams. And you could just say maybe every 25 to 30 pounds, you're going to add about a half a gram. And roughly about most proteins, other than like collagen or bone broth protein, are roughly around 10% leucine. So if you get 30 grams of protein, 3 grams of leucine, if it's from eggs or steak or some sort of muscle meat It's going to
Yeah,
or whey
animal-based protein.
protein
Yeah.
or even plant protein. It's going to be roughly about 10%. So that's kind of
Yeah.
what you're referring to there.
Yes. So yeah. So I'm always like, gosh, if I hit the 40 grams, whether
Yeah.
it's a bone broth protein or a whey protein, or it's,
Hmm.
it's sausage or it's hamburgers from the night before with eggs, like that's a guarantee I'm going to hit that threshold so that
Yeah.
I'm really, and then obviously you need the stimulus too. You can, I mean,
Hmm.
not that we can't build some muscle with
Yeah.
just eating protein, but then I want, I obviously want, women, men alike to be lifting heavy weights. That
Yeah,
is the
for
name of the
sure.
game. You want to stimulate, and with the loss of estradiol, that stimulation is much more critical.
Mhm.
It's easier with estradiol because there's satellite cells that estradiol help to bind to that allows for that muscle protein synthesis. But as we lose estradiol, we really have to stimulate those muscle fibers to build that lean muscle, and also you need to have the substrates to actually build that lean muscle with. So for me, and a lot of the women I work with when it comes to weight, but most importantly, staying strong and having longevity, hitting those protein numbers in the morning where we're in a more thermogenic state makes the most sense. And that's where I see some not only muscle gains, but also weight
Mm.
loss.
Yeah, so hitting your protein and then also lifting weights. Now, lifting weights is so key, especially if we're talking about longevity. We know sarcopenia or muscle loss is a huge risk factor for all cause
Mortality.
morbidity and
Yeah.
mortality, right? So ending up with a chronic disease or ending up dying. And so it's so important that we preserve that lean body mass. And as those hormones go down, it becomes harder. So we need that stimulus, like you were talking about. But a lot of women are worried
They're going to get
about building too
bulky.
much muscle, right? Getting too bulky.
Oh, I wish. I wish it was that simple. I will say that gaining muscle mass, probably one of the most challenging things to do in our
Mm,
health journey.
true.
Like it is earned. I want any woman to hear that. Like you have to work for it. And it's amazing to me how hard you got to work for it as you get older. It is nowhere near as easy as it used to be. Like even 5 years ago, I will tell you, it was a lot easier than it is
Mm.
today for me. I did a big leg workout today, and man, it takes months and months and months of consistency to build any muscle, to be
Yeah. What are
honest.
some of your favorite exercises? I would
Yeah.
imagine compound exercises. What are some of the
And I,
things that you
I
like to do?
train for life too. So a
Yeah.
lot of presses. I'm lifting
Hmm.
my son,
Yeah.
my little, I'm trying to throw I'm only 5'2". So even in shoes, maybe 5'3" on a good day. But I want to be able to shot put my luggage
Mm.
into the overhead compartment. Like people always want to
You don't
help
want
me. And I'm
help.
like, I got
Yeah.
this. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me throw this thing in there with a baby, with a 4-year-old in one arm. So yeah, so I would say RDLs are a big one. I would say a lot of so RDLs, they do a lot of presses, a lot of bench press, and also shoulder press.
Hmm.
I would lunges. Yeah, a lot of compound movement where you're actually
Yeah.
lifting for life would be the direction that I would recommend
Yeah, and that's where
people.
you get the best growth hormone, testosterone stimulus. And we haven't talked about testosterone for women, but it's so key, especially for building muscle mass, libido, things like that, brain health.
Brain health, yeah.
Um, but yeah, those compound exercises, deadlifts, squats, right? The larger muscle groups, that's going to help stimulate more of that.
Yeah. And then movement. I mean, I think you got to get that in, and it's just kind of a necessary, I don't know. Some
Mm.
people love it. Some people it's a necessary evil. And that's just something you got to do. But then I also believe, I think about the blue zone centenarians or who are just moving constantly. And
Yeah.
that's there's no gyms, there's no lifting of weights. There's just a lot of movement in life. And so I want to embody that as well. So I'm always thinking about ways. I do a lot of exercise snacks. So after this interview, I'll do a little mini hit training
Mm.
where I'll knock out some jump squats, a little bit of plyometrics. I'll do some mountain climbers. I'll do some push-ups, and I will knock out a circuit in like 5 minutes, just enough to get my heart rate up, enough to
Yeah.
move me into probably zone 3, give or take. And again, do you move those fast twitch muscles? I want women and men, I want us to all have power. So if my
Mm.
son is falling off of something, or I need to snatch him up from whatever it may be, I have the ability, I've got that power. And so not only do I think strength is such a big player here in terms of longevity, but it's also power. So fast twitch movement. And so I do believe even, again, multiple times a day, 3 minutes in a sitting, not only do you get your blood sugar, I talk about a way to get your blood sugar it might tiny spike, but that it's gonna equal
Hmm.
out. More again, more resilient, but also to create again that longevity. I'm always thinking, how am I going to train for life? How am I training to do the things I want to do in 20 years from now, not just in 5 years from now? And so that's always on my mind. I build a lot of movement into my day, whether it's walking outside so that I get that sunshine and that cortisol awakening response in the morning, or it is fast twitch movements like plyometrics and HIIT training, whether it's sprint training. I don't do that very often, maybe a couple times a week,
Hmm.
or it's lifting weights. Like I'm always thinking about ways, like how do we move our bodies in a way that we are building resilience for the future?
Yeah, it sounds like you have a good plan there. Our ancestors walked on average 5 to 8 miles a day. Most Americans are not even walking a mile a day. So yeah,
Yeah, under
we got to pick it up.
5,000 steps. Yeah.
Yeah, we got to pick it up for sure. I
Yes.
always recommend getting at least 10,000
At least
per day.
10,000.
Yeah,
And track it. I mean, we live in
yeah.
a time where we have all this ability to track. I have a Whoop strap on right now, and they just added step tracking.
Yep.
And I love it because I love the body score. I love the sleep. But if I had to choose a wearable, it would be a continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
that would be
sure,
my
for sure.
favorite.
Now you mentioned sleep there. So
Yeah.
as melatonin's going down,
Mm.
melatonin is our major sleep hormone, but
Yes.
melatonin actually is also it's an anti-aging hormone. It really
And
helps clean
yeah.
up the mitochondria and protect the mitochondria for optimal energy production. So melatonin's key. What can women do to help optimize the melatonin they're still producing and have good sleep?
Mm. One, eradicate stress. So gonna
Hmm.
need to I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Pretty impossible right
Pretty
there.
impossible. But I think, yeah, I mean, there is a level of being mindful of being
Hmm.
of stress. Especially in midlife where our stress tolerance isn't what it used to be. I would say that, we're talking about testosterone and estradiol and progesterone and maybe even growth hormone and cortisol. It's a big part of our circadian rhythm along with melatonin, and melatonin has a really difficult time doing its job when cortisol is very deregulated into the evening. And so there are mindfulness practices that I believe can be really beneficial to us. Again, even walking outside or dance parties, I mean, movement can be a part of this, but anything that helps you to kind of relieve some of that stress heading into the evening, I think is important. The other thing is having really great sleep hygiene. I know nobody wants to hear
Hmm.
it, but I always say treat your sleep routine like it's $1 million meeting. So every now and again, my husband will come to me with a work related question after my son went to bed, and it's my time to go to bed, and I'm like, is this $1 million question right now? Because if it is not, you can bring it up to me tomorrow morning. And so I'd say protecting that routine. And, for some of us, it's about getting a little bit more disciplined. So once my son's in bed at 8, I've got a half hour.
Hmm.
I start taking supplements. Like I always anchor my sleep routine to something physical. And so it's my supplement routine. It's magnesium, it's some systemic enzymes. I have a whole little protocol. And so I'll take those, and that's what really kicks off that routine. And then I'm very, very disciplined about it, particularly making sure that everything's cool enough in the room, that we have all of our rooms are completely blacked out and dark. My phone is put away. I have a book to read. And so I really want to make sure, and I honor my circadian rhythm by ensuring that I go to bed at the same time every night within about I would say 15 to 20 minutes. But then more importantly, I honor that by waking up at the same time every single morning. So even if I go to bed late, like let's say for whatever reason, I decided that I needed to stay up a little bit longer than I was supposed to, I still honor my wake up time so that I can keep my circadian rhythm running. So that's one of the ways that I really honor that process and honor that melatonin is being released when it needs to be, released. The other thing that I love for women in midlife, to help support melatonin is considering bioidentical progesterone as a supplement. Especially if you're cycling in the second phase of your cycle when we would make it. There is a deep connection between progesterone levels and melatonin levels. And I think that there's that correlation of them dropping has something to do with progesterone as well. And estradiol, really a lot of how the brain is changing at that time. I believe it's like 67% of women in midlife suffer from sleep issues. And it's, I mean, we can see on a chart that melatonin is dropping pretty much at the same time as progesterone is when we look at hormones across the board. And so if you're really struggling, especially that second phase of your cycle with sleep issues, like that's when it really pops up. My recommendation is to consider trying, if supplements aren't working, adding in progesterone to kind of help ease some of those sleep issues that you're having. I find
What's
that's
a good
really
what's a
helpful.
good dose for women if they're going to try that? What's typically a good dose? Obviously, I mean, you and I would both recommend working with a practitioner on that, but
Yes.
what have you seen for, being average dosage?
I think 200 milligrams. I personally like rhythmically doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to follow the way that progesterone would be working with my
Yeah.
cycle. So I normally, if I'm recommending it, and again, you want to be working with a practitioner, I start at 100. I move to
Mm-hmm.
2. Sometimes women need to go up to 3, kind of around peak progesterone, and then I would step it back down to 2 and then
Mm.
1 right before your cycle, because that's
Yeah.
how progesterone does work in the body.
And would
But
you do it in divided doses? Would you do it at night? How would you dose that?
so it depends on the person. So
Yeah.
if it's just a sleep issue and just general wanting progesterone support, I would do it at night. But if
Mm-hmm.
women are exhibiting severe anxiety, panic
Mm.
attacks, major stress tolerance issues, I would usually recommend, I would split it. Let's say
Mm.
200 at night, 100 during the day, or 100 at night, 100 during the day. It just really depends on what the symptoms are. Like if it's mainly sleep, then I would really stack it at night. And I wouldn't go any higher than 100 during the day, because 200 milligrams of oral micronized progesterone can be very sedative like. And
Mm.
so I would really be mindful about that.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Now, you've also written some books on essential oils and
I
how they
have.
impact hormones. What are some of your favorite essential oils to use, and how do you like to use them?
For sleep, for stress, what are we talking about? Any
I
of those,
mean,
all?
sleep and stress would be a great place to start right there. I mean, most people would love better sleep and better stress response.
Yeah, and we're talking about supplementation, and not to say that melatonin can't be supportive, but I think
Hmm.
it's worth trying some of these other things out. I think even progesterone can be even more supportive than bringing on
Mm.
melatonin, and so I know there can be a lot of controversy around that. And if you do
Hmm.
decide to do melatonin, I would just start at a very low dose, like one
Hmm.
milligram at the most. But I would anchor to essential oils. So besides my supplements, I anchor to oils as well. Like we put
Yeah.
lavender on my son every night before he goes to bed. And I
Hmm.
think about, like, I'm so grateful to be in perimenopause when I have such a young child, because I think about how routine his nighttime routine is. It is consistent. Like we don't
Yeah.
deviate. I'm sure it's for your kids too, right? It's like they know it.
Oh
Bath,
yeah.
brush your teeth, pajamas, reading, cuddles, essential oils, and but with
Yep.
pajamas. And so I think of the same thing. I'm like, why aren't I anchoring to a routine every night? And so I love oils like lavender, jasmine, cedarwood, clary sage, anything that's calming, Roman chamomile. You could have it in a diffuser, you can make it in a roller. But what I love about scent is that it anchors our nervous system, or even our limbic system, to being relaxed. It's almost like you're sending your brain a signal like, hey, it's time for bed. This is the scent for bedtime. This is the scent to turn it off and to go to sleep. Because as we get older, it's a lot harder. We don't just shut it off. You can't just run into bed anymore. You got to like really, kind of you wind yourself down. For stress, I love a lot of different oils. I think you got to find what really resonates with you, and carve out a moment. So I think for all of us, transitions can be hard. So if you're coming home from work and you've got to put on the parent face, you got to shift gears. I think taking a minute or two, having an oil like lavender, or citrus oil like wild orange or grapefruit, something that feels good to you, something that can offer a state change. Because I think so often when we're in the mess of things, whether we're feeling stressed from work, or we're feeling stressed from something that we had to finish, or maybe it was a really intense conversation, it can be hard to shift into that next, being a gentle parent, or
Hmm.
showing up the way that we want. And so I love scent as a way of kind of resetting the stress response system, resetting the limbic system, and giving us a state change. I always say with essential oils, you can choose your mood. You can choose how you want to feel. Most of us are choosing to feel more peaceful or more joyful. And so picking an oil that helps you to feel that way, that shifts your state, it can happen in a matter of seconds. And so I think, it's more so that it is the reminder of, oh, let me take this moment, this 1 minute before I walk in the door, this 1 minute before I leave the office to reset my state. And let me use something to anchor myself to that, which is like a scent, right? That's, I don't know anything that works faster than a scent. Maybe movement, maybe like you put on your favorite Whitney Houston song, I don't know, Beyonce, and like you maybe that works for you, but I find that scent works a lot faster.
Yeah, that's great advice, Marie. So this has been a great interview. You've given so many great nuggets here. And so, guys, you can check out, she's got a couple great books all about these essential oils. She's got the essential oils menopause solution and the essential oils hormone solution as well. Check out her website, Dr. Mariza, but with a Z, Mariza.com. And also you can follow her on social media as well. Any last words of inspiration here for our audience?
I would say, anytime you're thinking about making these changes, one at a time, but also I always imagine kind of my vision self, my future self, and how she's living that life and how she's feeling in the future. And just remember that all of these different strategies and habits are really about creating the beautiful life game that we're creating. And so anytime I am doubling down on whether it's balancing my blood sugar or getting a better sleep routine or eating for my brain, whatever that may be, I'm always imagining myself in the future living that way, operating that way, and feeling so amazing in that. And so just note that all of this is really just a part of you living a beautiful life, not only currently, but later in life. And that it's those little things every day that compounds towards that North Star in future.
Well, I love that, guys. Again, check out Mariza, check out her website. It is drmariza.com. So check that out, and it's time to go live a beautiful life.